Power in America did not centralize through visible conquest. There were no tanks rolling down Main Street, no monarch announcing a decree from a balcony. Instead, power centralized through finance. Gradually, structurally, quietly. Within the span of less than a generation in the 19th century, local economic authority, once enforced by community institutions, was replaced by a system increasingly tied to national debt, federal legislation, and centralized banking structures. This transition was not presented as consolidation. It was framed as modernization, as stability, as efficiency. But structural shifts rarely identify themselves as power transfers. They arrive disguised as improvements to coordination, as solutions to volatility, as necessary reforms during crisis. And once embedded, they are difficult to reverse. The rulebook Jefferson couldn't access. In 1817, former President Thomas Jefferson requested access to a guild rulebook from one of the country's established trade institutions. He was denied. That denial reveals something important about early American economic architecture. Inside those guild systems existed enforceable standards governing pricing, apprenticeships, labor practices, and verification of quality. 7-year apprenticeships were common. Entry into trades required certification by masters. 2 independent measurers often verified completed work before payment could be issued. Fair pricing was not optional, it was structural. Guild systems did not eliminate inequality, but they did limit unchecked undercutting and arbitrary price manipulation. Economic authority was distributed across networks rather than concentrated in distant institutions. Reputation functioned as credit. Trust operated as infrastructure. Economic power lived close to the community that generated it. And that proximity limited consolidation. Local enforcement as power containment. When pricing standards are enforced locally, external actors struggle to destabilize markets from afar. When apprenticeships regulate entry, supply cannot be rapidly flooded. When payment requires verification by independent measurers, manipulation becomes harder. Local enforcement slows volatility. Volatility invites speculation. Speculation invites consolidation. As markets expanded geographically, scale introduced a new pressure. Scale requires abstraction. Abstraction requires distance. Distance weakens relational accountability. And when accountability weakens, leverage strengthens. This is not moral commentary, it is structural mechanics. When durability stops being profitable, durability disappears. The same rule applies to systems. The National Currency Act, linking money to debt. In 1863, during the Civil War, Congress passed the National Currency Act. The country required stable wartime financing. A fragmented patchwork of state banknotes created inefficiencies. Reform was justified, but embedded within the act was a structural shift that permanently altered monetary authority. National banks could issue currency only if they purchased U.S. government bonds. Currency creation became tied directly to federal debt. Money issuance and national borrowing became structurally linked. Shortly thereafter, a federal tax on state banknotes effectively pushed local currencies out of circulation. Community-backed notes faded. Institution-backed currency replaced them. This was not confiscation. It was architectural redesign. Once currency became bond-backed, expansion of money supply required expansion of federal debt markets. Power shifted upward. Dependency followed. The Homestead Act, opportunity through credit. Just months before the National Currency Act, Congress passed another transformative law, the Homestead Act. It offered 160 acres of land to settlers willing to improve it. This was framed as democratization of opportunity, but land alone is not capacity. Building required tools, livestock, seed, equipment, construction materials. Capital required credit, and credit was increasingly centralized. Opportunity became tied to borrowing. Borrowing tied individuals to institutions capable of issuing loans at scale. Expansion, once driven by local exchange networks, became debt-dependent. Growth required financial approval. Approval required institutional access. Institutional access centralized leverage. The architecture was subtle but decisive. Industrialization and vertical obligation. As the 19th century progressed, industrialization reshaped labor relationships. Company towns emerged across mining regions and manufacturing hubs. Workers were paid in scrip, redeemable only at company-owned stores. Housing was owned by employers. Healthcare and goods flowed downward from management. Economic ecosystems became vertically integrated. Horizontal trust networks gave way to vertical obligation structures. In guild systems, craftsmen negotiated within communities. In company towns, workers operated within hierarchies. The shift was not simply economic, it was psychological. Identity became tied to employer structures rather than community institutions. Leaving meant losing housing, wages, and purchasing access simultaneously. Mobility narrowed. Dependency widened. Identity becomes legible. As financial systems centralized, identity systems formalized. Census tracking expanded. Tax collection standardized. Record-keeping professionalized. Individuals became measurable units within national frameworks. Money centralized. Labor industrialized. Identity formalized. The more legible citizens became to centralized systems, the easier large-scale governance operated. Relational accountability diminished. Institutional oversight expanded. Scale rewards systems that can process distance efficiently. Distance weakens local negotiation. Negotiation once contained power. Standardization now directed it. Scale and incentives. Scale itself is not inherently oppressive. Scale enables infrastructure, interstate commerce, national defense, and complex coordination. But scale changes incentives. Local systems prioritize durability because reputation extends across generations. Centralized systems prioritize efficiency because performance is measured quarterly. Local enforcement values continuity. Centralized architecture values optimization. Optimization concentrates. Concentration compounds. And compounded authority resists decentralization. Even today, certain communities attempt to preserve horizontal trust systems, cooperative societies, mutual aid networks, religious economic models, but they operate within a broader financial architecture designed for consolidation. Scale favors entities capable of managing abstraction. Abstraction reduces friction. Reduced friction accelerates flow. Flow consolidates power. Architecture determines outcome. Power does not centralize randomly. It centralizes through legal design, monetary structure, industrial organization, and identity formalization, through bond-backed currency systems, through debt-dependent expansion models, through vertically integrated labor ecosystems, through standardized data frameworks. Each change appeared reasonable in isolation. Collectively, they altered the direction of authority. Local rulebooks faded. National frameworks dominated. Community-backed systems receded. Institution-backed systems expanded. Power followed architecture, and architecture shapes outcome long before citizens feel its effects. If you want deeper breakdowns of how financial structures quietly shape political power and economic dependency, make sure you subscribe. And consider this. If power centralizes through architecture rather than force, what modern systems are we building today that may reshape authority tomorrow?